The Daniel Boone Backcountry Byway Fall event. Let's talk about radio communications while out on the trail. That's what's coming up next on El Cara Ham Radio. All right. Well, good morning, everybody. My name's Chris Perry, KY4CKP, WRES 843. We'll talk about what those mean here in just a moment. I'm a professional trainer by trade. I teach on computer classes, but I've been a licensed ham for a few years now. And they asked me to give a simple presentation on communications here for the event. So I said, sure, why not? Let me start off by asking a couple of questions with folks. How many folks here have your GMRS license? We got a few of us, Does anybody here have your amateur radio license? Got one or two. Okay, we're going to talk about both of those. Today we're going to talk about some radio options for on the trail. How many folks have a radio with you today? Yeah, a few more. Okay. All right, let's talk about some options in the world at large. Almost everybody's probably familiar with CB radios. Got examples of CB radios right here. These are nice little radios you can get off Amazon, about $100. You get the radio, batteries, you get a rooftop mag mount for the antenna. These work just fine for a lot of things. What's the main problem with CB radios in off-roading? Anybody know? Range is one. They're not as common anymore. That's one of the biggest problems. They're not as common as they used to be. Truck drivers don't use them as much as they used to. They still use them, but they use GMRS and other things, especially the old smartphone, right? So there's nothing really wrong with CBs, but if you're going to go out on the trail, of course, we're at a big event here today. Well, what is everybody else using? Doesn't matter if you've got a radio, if it's not like anybody else's, right? If it can't talk to anybody else. So what if you're not at a big event? What if you're just going out with a buddy? What if you've got a local club you like to go out with? Well, what do they use? Okay, so here's an example of GMRS radio. Doesn't look that much different from these other ones, does it? All these handy talkies or walkie-talkies look the same, basically. It's what's inside that matters. In fact, this is from a company, B-Tech, which most people know as Baofeng. This is a Baofeng. But they make different kinds of radios. They handle different frequencies. So ultimately, GMRS, FRS, MURS, CB radio, ham radio, any of these can work when you're on the trail. The primary thing is, what does everybody else have? We want to try to have the same thing that at least the majority of other people have, at least the trail leader, right? And so coordinating that before any off-roading events would obviously be a good thing. If you've just got some buddies, if you got a local group, set a standard, right? Pick something, right? That's the number one thing. Pick something. Now, GMRS has become or is becoming probably the de facto standard. It's not 100% when you look, especially around the nation, certainly worldwide, but even around the nation. But it's becoming more and more the standard. There's a couple of reasons for that. Which applies to pretty much all these radios, okay? The radios themselves are relatively inexpensive. 20, 30, 50, $100, you can get a radio or two, right? So the price is not really the issue, not for most people really, right? How much do you spend on, $100 won't get you anything for your vehicle hardly, right? It's just coordinating. But why is GMRS working? Well, there's some technical details on why GMRS is working and why it's being adopted. The main thing is inexpensive radios and the frequency it uses works pretty well for off-roading. Now, let's go into just a little bit of technical detail. With a radio like this, and like what I have in my truck, and some of you probably have in your vehicles, this can do what's called 2 meters and 70 centimeters. Well, what's important to know about that is, if you want to go further, 2 meters works better, right? But if you want to go through things like trees and leaves and buildings and stuff, 70 centimeters works better. So why is GMRS becoming popular in off-roading? Because it's close to the 70 centimeter band. It's just a little bit off of it. It's set aside, the particular frequencies are set aside so that you can get these kinds of radios and you don't have to take a test for the license. CB, you don't have to have a test for the license, do you? MERS, FRS, even if you haven't really heard of those, you don't have to take a test for a license, right? But the frequency works a little better. Won't go quite as far, but far enough. I mean, when you're on the trail, how far are we really trying to communicate? How often are you really trying to communicate with somebody even 100 yards away when you're on the trail? Usually it's within 50 yards, isn't it? Well, you don't need anything to talk 50 yards. It's hard to yell that far, right? So any of these can work, but with this guy, in order to push this button right here, you got to have an FCC license, okay? It's not hard to get. It's not even that expensive. 15 bucks for the test and 35 bucks for the FCC. The questions are published. The answers are published. They want you to pass, okay? But you got to take at least one test, right? GMRS. GMRS doesn't require a test. Now, how many folks knew this? In order to push this button right here, you also have to have a license. So at least a few of you knew that. Not everybody realizes that, and part of the reason for that is there's been confusion over the years, and part of that is because the FRS, the Family Radio Service, overlaps the General Mobile Radio Service. The frequencies, the channels, GMRS is broken up into channels similar to CB. There's just different frequencies involved. Well, FRS and GMRS overlap a little over half the channels. FRS does not require any kind of a license at all. GMRS does. So what's the difference between FRS and GMRS? GMRS, you can have more power. You can have 50-watt mobile radios, 5-watt handhelds. FRS, you can't. FRS has to be half a watt or less typically. Okay, so more power, better antennas. When you look at radios, what's the number one factor that's going to help determine whether you can talk to somebody else, regardless of how far away they are? Antenna. Doesn't matter. It's like your stereo at home. You can have the most expensive stereo in the world, but if you've got the cheapest speakers in the world, how good is it going to sound? Not very good. Speakers make your system at home. Antennas make your radio, okay? So anytime we can upgrade a radio, give it a better antenna, right? Give it an external antenna. When you're in a vehicle, you're basically in a Faraday cage. Not much signal gets in and out. And that depends on what kind of film you may have on your windows. So having a better antenna, being able to get an external antenna, even this little stubby black canister right there, which is my 2 meter, 70 centimeter, allows me to talk 30 miles away, depending on conditions. It's outside the vehicle, and it's designed to be that way. All right. But let me ask this question. How many of you have ever run into this? You're out with a group of folks, at least one other person. You try to talk to them on the radio, and apparently they can't hear you, and you can't seem to hear them. Has that ever happened to anybody? It's happened to me. Does anybody know why that happens? In many cases, you're too close. You're actually too close to the other person, especially if they're right in front of you or right behind you. You're too close. What happens is you're overloading their radio. When we have these radios, we talk about the front end of the radio, the receive components in the radio. They receive the signal, translate it, put it out the speaker. You're overloading what's called the front end. Too much power is coming in, okay? If too much power comes in, it basically can't do anything with the signal. You get nothing. You'd be better off shouting to the car ahead of you, okay? Well, what's one of the aspects of that makes that problem even worse? Not only are we very close, but in a lot of cases, you're using too much power. Who's ever said that? Too much is a bad thing. Too much power. Too much power. You're trying to talk 20 feet away. You don't need 5 watts of power. Even though 5 watts isn't a lot, for 20 feet, that's a lot of power. Half a watt would be enough. 1 watt would be enough. So when you're on the trail, make sure you put your radios, if you're just in a group, make sure you put your radios on usually the lowest power they've got. It may just be low, medium, and high. It could be low and high. Sometimes they have ultra low, which is half a watt. Try to use the lowest power possible. It'll actually help you communicate to the nearby vehicles better. Right now, when you're in a vehicle and you're on a handy-talkie and your windows are up, this attenuates your signal, and you can probably talk to folks. In fact, you may have noticed that sometimes people on handy-talkies are hearing people better than you are on your mobile. It's because their signal's being attenuated. Drops it down to that half watt, 1 watt area because they're probably on high power. So that's something to consider. We want better antennas usually. It's never a bad idea, but when you're in a relatively tight group, you don't want too much power. And it's counterintuitive because in almost all things technological, more is better. I teach computer classes. I always add a corollary to that. More is better, or at least not a negative. But in our case, it can be a negative. Okay. So when you're in a group and you're not trying to talk 30 miles away, you want to use low power. Okay. Generally lower the better. In fact, you can actually damage radios if they're too close and you're using too much power. You can actually blow out the front end. Okay. So things we want to think about with off-road communications. What is the group using? And if you're part of a group and you haven't established a standard, I highly recommend you talk about that amongst your group. You can use anything you want, but generally for off-roading, GMRS is becoming the standard, and for good reason. Now, amateur radio could do the same thing, but you got to get your license. You got to take at least one test. And it's not hard. Like I say, the questions are published. The answers are published, right? They want you to pass this test, but you got to take a test. I belong to a radio club out of Somerset, Lake Cumberland Amateur Radio Association. We have a YouTube channel. I've got some business cards up here. We cover all kinds of topics. We give tests. I'm a VE, volunteer examiner. I'm allowed to give tests so people can get their ham license. Okay, and it's a volunteer basis. We don't earn money for doing that, right? But you got to take a test. With this, fill out a form online, pay your money, $35 for 10 years, covers your whole family, right? And you get your license, no test. But you're supposed to have a license when you use GMRS. Now, I'm not the radio police, right? And I know none of you all have ever done this, but there's rumors out there on the interwebs that sometimes people push this button and they don't have a license. I mean, I've seen the rumors. I'm sure you all have seen those rumors too. Is the FCC flying black helicopters around looking for people on handy-talkies deep in a trail? Of course not, right? But on the other hand, you could go get your license. You'll get a call sign. More people will be willing to talk to you. If you don't have a call sign and you're on a certain kind of radio, a lot of people won't talk to you because they know you're not using that service legally. Okay, it's just something to think about. $35, 10 years, covers your whole immediate family. Okay, no test. If you want information on GMRS, this QR code will take you through some information on how to get licensed. If you'd like some information on your amateur radio, it can open up the world. In my truck here, I can talk all over the world using my HF radio and this antenna right here. I talk to Europe, I talk to South America, Australia. It's a fun hobby, but that's not really useful on the trail, okay? Right, these kinds of things are more useful on the trail. And my other radio that I use is more useful on the trail. So some things to think about on the trail. We want to have hopefully the same kind of radio or capability of radio that other people in the group are going to have. We want to know how to use that radio. We all go to YouTube University, right? Plenty of information on how to use the radios. That's not really that hard. We can think personally what we want to do about licensing. Again, I'm not the license police or anything. The radios are out there. They're not that expensive, right? But just some of those things to think about. What's everybody else using? Are we overpowering things? Many times people are. Turn your power down, folks. You'll actually communicate better within your group if you're not trying to put out too much power. I know 2 or 3 of the rides we've been on, that was happening to folks. They're like, I'm on my mobile and nobody can hear me. Yeah, you're probably pumping out 50 watts and you're overloading everybody's front end. And they can't hear a word. They can't even hear static usually. Radio's just pretty much shut down. So that's a little bit about what I wanted to talk about today. I don't know how long it's been. Let's take a few questions. Does anybody have any questions on radio? Any questions at all?
How hard are those old things to, like when you buy them on Amazon, to program them?
How hard are they to program? There's two answers to that question. That's a great question. Extremely hard to program and completely easy to program. Which way do you want to go? if you can program these right here from the keypad, and once you know half a dozen, 6 or 8 settings, they're usually in the same spot, menu-wise, menu 27 or whatever it is. It's not that difficult, but to program 127 memory locations in here, there's free software called Chirp, C-H-I-R-P, that you can get, and that's what I typically use. I've got a whole pre-programmed thing. If I've got a radio, I can just plug it into the computer and slam that entire program onto the radio. Once you get that figured out once, and there's so many easy ways to do it. So if you're interested in programming Baofeng or amateur radios, look at Chirp. Lots of YouTube videos on that, how to use it, how to bring things in. Okay, that's the easy way to do it. And then you can save it out and reuse it or make changes to it and update it and then save it out again. So that's the number one way. What's that? Well, let's just take a quick look at it. See what brand it is.
It's a radio.
Radioddity. So Radioddity is one of the many, many brands. Typically, they're called Baofeng clones. It's 2 meter, 70 centimeter. Well, that one might be GMRS or something else. I don't know. I was going to say they might actually make, didn't say which model, but if it's GMRS, that's 453 or something megahertz. What's that now?
Local or distance, is that one of the power settings?
I don't know what they call it on the Radioddities. I've never had a Radioddity. I've seen them and I've heard about them. It's usually like low, high, low, medium, high, ultra low. If it's a half watt, sometimes they may call it something slightly different. It's usually fairly obvious though. They're talking about the power output for whatever the setting is.
Who you're with, hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully you can coordinate with whatever your group is. Big events like this, they typically try to standardize on GMRS. And then they'll tell you what channel they're going to be on. It's very similar to CB in that regard. GMRS is broken into specific channels, which is just different frequencies. Okay. And they'll say channel 16, channel 15, whatever it's going to be. Okay. And with a true GMRS radio, they're usually pre-programmed into it. And you just go up and down the dial until you find 15 or whatever number they called out. So they don't usually need that much programming. The only time they might need programming is if you get into what's known as repeaters. Repeaters are usually up on a hill, big tower, put out lots of power comparatively, and allow you to talk in a much broader area. Okay, not everybody, in a trail ride, you're not trying to hit a repeater. You're just talking within your group. Was there another question?
Yeah, so last time I checked, which has been a while, there weren't any GMRS repeaters in the Slade area. You know if there's anybody trying to put one up, or is there one now?
I don't know offhand if there is. My club in Somerset, we run 2 in the Lake Cumberland area because there's lots of tourism down there. Some clubs don't deal with GMRS, sadly, because it's not ham radio to them. I don't agree with that philosophy. Our club runs 2 GMRS repeaters because it serves the community, and that's what my club is all about. But I don't know for sure if there's anything out here or plan to be out here. They're not super hard to put together. In fact, we've done a video series on how to build one. Yeah, I mean, you have to get into duty cycle and things, but we're building some crossband repeaters for ham radio right now. We did a GMRS build to kind of show how to do that. So there may not be any of those kinds of repeaters in this area. Not that it's that expensive or hard to do as a hobby, but there just may not be any in this area. Yes?
And a point towards a reason to get your license, a practical reason. You can't use repeaters unless you actually have a number, right?
Right. Right. If you on ham radio or GMRS, if you especially on things like repeaters, if you start talking and you don't have a license, you don't have a call sign, very few people are going to talk to you other than to say, "What's your call sign? What's your call sign?" If you don't have a call sign, you shouldn't be pushing the button. Okay. Now, if you're just out hunting, you're out fishing, you're hiking, you're with your kids, you're on a trail ride, Again, the licensed police are not flying overhead in a black helicopter, but repeaters and things, that's where you're reaching more people, and they tend to be sticklers for the rules because you can lose your license. You can be fined. The FCC just fined a ham operator. Well, actually, they just fined a person who was jamming a GMRS repeater a month or two ago, $10,000. They will find you if you're causing enough trouble. You're just going out hunting occasionally or something like that, they don't have time for that. But if you start causing trouble for folks on things like repeaters, they will find you. Okay. Anybody else have any questions? Yes.
Are there any considerations for external GMRS antennas? Like on CB, I know like you want to mount it in a certain place.
It's like any other kind of radio. If you can get an external antenna mounted, you're going to get better distance out of it. So if you're driving around, you're trying to hit repeaters that are regional, that's still the better way to do it. Again, on a trail ride, it's not really necessary. But yes, there are. And it totally depends on your vehicle. It depends on your antenna. This little can up here is designed to be in a corner of the vehicle like this. Not every antenna is. A lot of times they want to be in the center of the roof, if possible, because it's the highest point, or the center of your hood, which nobody wants one down there. But it depends on the antenna. There's checks and tests you can do to test the antenna to make sure it's in an operable range and it's not going to damage your radio. If the antenna is not in a good spot, what happens is power that you're sending through the antenna feeds back down the line and comes into your radio, and it can damage your radio. So you want the antenna to be in a proper operating environment. We call it SWR, standing wave ratio. It's just a reflection of power that'll come right back down the line if the antenna is not in a good spot. Well, you can get different kinds of devices to test for that. They make specialized meters and things. You can get a real inexpensive one on Amazon called a nano VNA. Those are 40, 50, 60 bucks on the low end. You can spend tens of thousands of dollars if you're a professional, but you can get relatively inexpensive devices, plug the antenna in, it sends a signal, and it tests.
Same meter work on CB and GMRS?
In theory, yes. It depends on the frequency capabilities of that particular device, because everything's on a different frequency, but most of them can cover a pretty wide range of frequencies. Okay. CB's a little different because it's 10 meters. Well, it's 11 meters and 2 meters, 70 centimeters. Sometimes devices split between, are they UHF, VHF, or are they HF? So that's what you would want to look for. Is it UHF, VHF only, or does it cover into the HF spectrum? Or if this is what you want to cover specifically, just look for an HF capable unit.
I have that.
Okay. Yeah, because CB's right in the middle. Well, not in the middle, but it's right in there with the amateur radio bands. 10 meters is amateur radio, 12 meters is amateur radio, but 11 meters was set aside for the public with no licensing or anything required. Okay. Any other questions? Anybody else? Anybody want to talk about some costs? Right? Right. This radio right here, I'll sell it to you for $5,000. Doesn't cost $5,000. Somebody laughing. That's part of the good news. You know, depending on how big of a gearhead you are, you can spend as much money as you want to on any kind of radios, any kind of radios, amateur radio, anything, like a lot of us spend on our rigs. You can get radios usually in the $40 to $60 range on the low end. 80 to 100, you get a pretty nice radio, right? These were kits. These CB radios were kits. They came with mag mount antennas and everything. They were about $100 for each one. And that's kind of the upper end for that kind of stuff. Now, I've got a handy talkie in the truck. It's from a big name brand, Yaesu. And when I bought it, it was $400 something. Right? It's higher quality. It's got better electronics, had better waterproofing and dust proofing and stuff like that. But most people don't want or need that kind of a radio. I've got a bunch of these cheap ones. I've got one of those. Okay. Right. Because these are inexpensive and they can get the job done in 9 times out of 10. Okay. So pricing, not too bad. Now for mobile radios, you can get those pretty inexpensive too. 80 to 100 bucks on the low end. $200, $300, $400 on the high end. There's different brands. Midland's a big brand for handy talkies and mobiles. But some of these other companies make mobiles as well. The thing with a mobile that's nice, you're typically going to hook up to an external antenna, and they do have high power. They usually go 40, 50 watts. So if you do have repeaters in your area and you're driving around the county and different things, you want to hit those, right, then that can help you out. So pricing wise, you don't have to spend a lot of money, especially for things that are a hobby. Now you're going to get into amateur radio. You can spend 6 figures on amateur radio easily. Most people don't, okay, because they don't need to. Any other questions on anything? Yes, the antenna needs to match the frequency it's for. And so for this little antenna right here, this little canister, inside of there is a coil of wire, because typically you would want that antenna to be, I don't know what it is, 20 or 30 inches long. That's not 20 or 30 inches long. So it's engineered with a coil so that it shrinks it down so you can go in your garage better and things like that. But you have to match your frequency. Right. Now this one also has a coil, and this one moves up and down. And that's how it's able to tune a whole bunch of different HF frequencies. Because otherwise, like for CB, for a full-size CB antenna, it's 102 inches. Okay, that's a big whip. Right? So that gets into matching the output of your radio, making sure you don't get reflected power incorrectly. And now you can take a raw piece of wire and string it on the ground, and you can receive all kinds of things. It's when you go to transmit, you'd run into problems. People have hooked up to fences, things like that, and you can receive. Not always great, but if you press the button, then you'd be in trouble because it wouldn't be tuned for any given frequency. Okay.
It's supposed to be vertical.
Pretty much every antenna. Well,
I see a lot of,
there's two things, right? So there's two things. If your antenna is vertical and you're trying to talk to somebody else who's vertical, that's the best matchup. If your antenna is horizontal and you're trying to talk to somebody else and their antenna is horizontal, that's the best matchup. But a vertical to a horizontal is not a great matchup. It can still work, but you lose a lot of power, let's call it. Okay, a lot of gain. So again, you want to match. So typically with a repeater, they've got a vertical antenna way up on a tower. So you want your antenna to be vertical. Typically on the trails with handy talkies, when you're holding a handy talkie, don't hold it like this, like your cell phone. You do want to hold it like this. You want that antenna to be as vertical, reasonably vertical, okay? Because that's how that's meant to work. Any other questions?
I was silly doing that, but I was doing it all the time.
Yeah, no, you should hold it pretty vertical to get maximum output for the radio. Okay. Any other questions?
You mentioned tuning. The GMRS antennas, they normally don't seem to need to be tuned. Is that a true statement? Or
Well, typically, whatever antenna came with your radio, which is, we usually call it a rubber ducky, and it's meant to be thrown in the trash immediately and something better put on. But they're supposed to be tuned by the manufacturer. Really, it's whoever the manufacturer contracted out of China to build that ultra cheap antenna to give it away to you. Your $30, your $20 went for this, not the antenna, right? But they should be tuned for that radio. Now, sometimes when you check those, they're not that great, but they should be. They're supposed to be. Now, when you get a radio and it's got the built-in antenna, like the blister packs from Walmart and Amazon, typically GMRS or FRS or whatever, and it's got a permanently attached antenna, it should be tuned for the frequencies that radio can handle, okay? But that you do want to check that. You want to make sure that whatever antenna you're using matches the frequencies you're trying to transmit on, so you don't damage your radio and so you get maximum output. Okay. Any other questions? Is that it? Anything at all? Again, if you want any information on how to get your ham license, this QR code will take you there. If you're interested in your GMRS license, this one will take you there. I've got some business cards if anybody's interested. Again, the ham club I work with, like Cumberland Amateur Radio Association's just west of Somerset. And we do run a YouTube channel, cover a lot of cool content there. Okay. And that's it, unless there's any other questions. You sure can. You can ask more questions. Now the cameras are going to get shut off.
And talking about repeaters,
Sure thing.
um, does it have to be fixed?
Yes. Technically, due to FCC regulations, repeater is supposed to have a known location. You have to register that location, that repeater, to the FCC.
As there isn't very much around here, I just wondered about building a trailer
Yeah.
that could be parked.
You can get special dispensation. Like we have an emergency communications trailer, and we can go and set up places. So you can get dispensation to have what is effectively a mobile repeater of some kind. But typically they're meant to be at a fixed location. And the reason for that is whatever frequency you want to register, they want to make sure there's nobody else already operating on that frequency that would be too close. Well, it's not just that though. You just don't want to interfere with somebody who would be too close to you on the same frequency.
Right.
So like our main repeater in Somerset, we're supposedly far enough away that we wouldn't be interfering with anybody else, except we can hear Cincinnati, we can hear Louisville, we can hear Tennessee.
Last time we were here, we had the CB on and we were listening to some guy broadcasting from Puerto Rico. So,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's just, it crisscrosses.
Sometimes the atmosphere helps us out. Sometimes 2 meters will go 200 or 300 miles. It's just normally it doesn't do that. And that's usually what happens to our repeater. Every so often we'll hear somebody and we'll be like, who the heck was that? And it was somebody in Cincinnati or places that are 75 or more miles away. They're supposed to be far enough, and usually they are, but occasionally they can slip in.
I was just curious if you could build a little trailer with a generator.
Yeah, we do the same thing with our emergency communications trailer for working events and emergencies and things like that. But again, you if it's a short-term event, you can probably get away with it. Longer term stuff, it really is meant to be permanent. Yeah, you just want to make sure you wouldn't be interfering with anybody else. You have to be careful around airports, things like that.
Yeah. So, because I was just curious, there's nothing around here.
There wasn't anything in the Lake Cumberland area where we are. As much tourism is down there, you would think maybe there would have been. So that's why we put up a couple.
I know that I find that a lot of times I'm the end of the trail.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm telling everybody, at this dog,
we ride tail.
Right.
Yeah, I lost. Well, I didn't lose the I have a 102-inch wheel.
Mm-hmm.
It got snagged. I've been running it for years. The last time we were down there, it got snagged, and the heavy spring popped it sideways. So that was.
Yeah, I take this one off when I go on the trail.
I've just got a 4-foot.
It's so funny how when you're going back and forth, you can hear it through the radio.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that was the other thing I was curious about. Of course, if you're driving 70 miles an hour with that whip, now it's doing this, which is...
It affects your performance. I mean, you can still use the radio, but it affects the performance. If you're using a mobile rig, you're driving down the road, sometimes you'll notice you're getting that in and out effect. We call it the screen door effect. It's because you're in motion is what tends to cause that. Especially if you're on the edge of reception or something, you'll hear it kind of going poof, 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 pop, kind of pops in and out.
Before you actually roll out, I'd like to look at my mobile setup.
Okay.
To do the radio.
Yeah, question on antennas. So I'm getting ready to put a mobile unit in my Jeep, and I was wanting to put an antenna on like the tire mount, so that when I take my top off, I can still run with it.
Yeah.
Is that not recommended?
It can work. You just have to test. Wherever you want to put an antenna, you have to test that location. Do you have it grounded well? With vehicles can be really tough.
We can look at mine. They can tell me what's wrong. What's wrong with it.
Vehicles can be tough because you've got noisemakers right in the engine bay.
Right.
So I've got the hood grounded in 2 spots or bonded in 2 spots. I've got each door bonded. I need to do my tailpipe because tailpipes are one of the worst offenders. They carry sound out of the engine bay. People don't realize that. So that's a noise factor. The SWR, the standing wave ratio, am I getting the reflected energy back? You have to get a device and test for that to see if your location is going to work. Like I say, that can up there is designed to be in the corner of the roof like that. Typically with most regular antennas, you want them in the center because the metal of the vehicle acts as what's called a ground plane, and it helps smooth out the signal in the SWR and things. But if the antenna is designed, well, my brother's got an F-150 that's all aluminum. so he had a hard time mounting an antenna someplace.
It's fiberglass, so
Yeah.
that's why I was thinking about going with a tire carrier. On the
People
back
do
of the
that. They
Jeep.
have the mounts that for the tailgate of a truck and stuff. They have mounts that go in that area, but you would just have to test what's going on there.
And then is there? I mean, if I were to go buy one, I mean, what would I want to look for? Just
You can get almost any antenna you want. You would have to have a device that can test for that's what's called SWR. Are there any ham clubs near where you live?
I live in Louisville. I don't know.
Yeah, there's ham clubs in Louisville. So other than having to buy a device yourself, not that they're expensive, you can get a $50-$60 device, and there's YouTube videos on how to use one. But if you could hook up with a local ham club, say, hey, I want to do this install. They probably got people that have done something similar. They'll have the tools, and usually they're willing to help out. They say, hey, stop by sometime and we'll check your device.
My primary purpose is for this stuff out on the trails. I just want to have a mobile unit that's running off the battery of the truck, and not having to.
But you don't want to damage the device because the antenna's in a bad spot.
So I guess
I didn't even know that was possible.
Mm-hmm. Not usually with real low power. There's not enough that it's a problem. But once you get into 50 watts and greater, that's when there can be enough power that it can damage things.
About 40.
Well, 40, 50 watts, you're in that territory.
Right. Yeah.
So if you run mid power, right, depending on where you live, if mid power gets you everywhere you want to go, it's safer. It'll burn less battery is another thing. And you'll have less chance of reflected power damaging your setup.
So I can do that with a 40 watt Midland.
Yeah, usually they have at least two settings. Usually they have at least a low and a high. Sometimes they have low, medium, and high. So if depending on where you live, try low. Can I reach everywhere I normally want to reach on low? If you can, use low. The lowest power you can use is the safest power, uses the less battery. It's easier on your equipment. Okay.
I think on mine, because I just got one delivered and put on mine. I got a 50 watt also for listening. I don't transmit yet. But yeah, I think every time you get the power off, it actually comes back on high. So every time you have to go back in to the menu and reset it back to low.
And there's pros and cons to that. If it always went to low, then you'd be always wanting to go to medium or high. And it'd be nice if it remembered.
That's what I was hoping.
But when you don't spend that much money, you don't get some of those features of that stuff. So
there's not one thing in particular. If I'm going to go out and order an antenna for a mobile unit that I need to look for.
Not really. Just get the. It's like a stereo. You want to put good money into the antenna, which doesn't mean super expensive, but you want to put good money into an antenna. Try to get a name brand. Nagoya is a good brand, but there's a lot of good brands out there. It's just like you want the best speakers you can afford for your stereo. I'd rather spend more money on speakers on my stereo than on the stereo. A generic stereo can sound awesome on great speakers, but the opposite's not going to be true. So antenna is everything, but you just want it, whatever you get, you want to test it, make sure it's within an acceptable range. It doesn't have to be perfect, but within an acceptable range.
And I saw some of the antennas say that they have different gain levels.
Mm-hmm.
Is there, recommended for like trail use, is there a particular
No, because you're usually so close, that stuff doesn't matter. No, I mean, if you're trying to talk 30, 40 miles away to a repeater or something, you're going to want medium to high power. You want the best antenna you can get, something like that. On the trail, you're normally so close, you don't need much.
All right.
You just want to make sure you're not going to damage your equipment.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, sir.
Yeah, no problem.
Josh.
Okay, sorry. My bad.
No worries.
Just no
But so get damage the equipment. That's actually what I'm a little bit concerned about. I mean, like I said, I got a new thing. It has a 3 decibel gain antenna that came with it, little bump, antenna.
Yeah.
And I threw it on top of the hood. They're on the front of the hood because I don't know, we were leaving.
Mm-hmm.
Threw it on there. So
what power are you putting out? 40 watts?
No, it's 50 watts.
50 watts.
Yeah, and I went down to low power, and then I noticed, like I said before, I powered off, powered back on, it was back on high power later on. So I'm like, crap, I'm not tearing up something we just bought. So
yeah, I mean, it's better to test and know, than to just kind of assume.
Almost looks like a UV5R.
It probably is. I've got a bunch of those. It's a Merkit. This is actually a tri-band.
Oh,
no, it's a Baofeng. Okay, I've got some Merkits that look almost like it, but they're tri-band. Yeah, it's that kind of a thing.
Like this one, I just got this the day before we came down here. It showed up, but it doesn't seem to have like all the FRS trains. There's like 7 channels.
Well, what is this supposed to be?
Is that a GMRS one or a
it's a GMRS.
Oh, yeah, so it can't do anything else.
Well, but it only has like 6 frequencies. So that's what I was talking about. The other, like we were on 15.
Repeater.
Yeah, we were on channel 15, so I had my mobile unit, also brand new, like I said, I picked these 2 up, I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. So, but that one had everything, and it skipped skipped the middle ones, whatever it is.
That was my question about those radios for.
Well, it should skip the
programming,
middle ones
it
because
only
that's
comes
too
with-
powerful.
Well, this one doesn't skip the middle ones.
Yeah, it
just
comes with
stops.
what's safe for FRS and GMRS.
So like so it's
Because that way they don't have to worry about a license. They can sell it to you legally.
I mean,
Yeah, to get
that
the other
one-
channels, you'd have to use software typically.
That's what I
Okay,
was.
so this
You can
one,
get chirp
Well,
and then reprogram.
but this one skips 8 through 14.
Yeah,
That one only does like 1 through 6, and then it quits.
yeah. What they're doing is they're only shipping the FRS compatible channels for two reasons. One is compatible with FRS,
Yeah.
so your radio will work with more people,
Yeah.
but it's also safer legally,
Okay.
right? Because they're saying, hey, here's this radio, you don't need a license for it,
Yeah.
right? Or somewhere there's a small blurb somewhere in the manual that says, oh,
that's
you
why
must get a
I looked
license.
at the
Stuff.
manuals. I didn't see anything.
Yeah, sometimes they'll hide it in there, but that way they don't have to do that. I know for a lot of radios, you have to program them through software is the easiest way to do it to get other channels.
Chirp.
Yeah,
That's what I remember him saying.
Yeah.
I wrote down.
Yeah, that
You
was
download chirp and you can.
yeah.
Because I've got one of those, and I'm like, well, this is pointless.
Well, yeah,
So
because I
now
couldn't.
I've got
Because I was flipping here between channel and frequency mode. Now I did type in a frequency that matched 15. I don't know,
Yeah.
but I did that last night after we got done with it.
Unless it really is, because Baofeng got slapped a few years ago.
Has a Japanese lady that tells you when it's on.
Turn it off and take the battery off and see if it's got a GMRS sticker under the battery.
Yeah, check that. Yeah. Where's the
Should have a little sticker in the corner if it's GMRS.
Baofeng?
The sticker should be right there.
Yeah,
No, there.
this looks like it may. Of course, I mean, with Baofeng, you never know how they've labeled it,
Yeah.
what model it truly
Mine-
is.
I've got two of those. One of them's a ham that I
Okay.
unlocked, and the other one, so I can do GMRS on it now because I
Yeah.
unlocked it. And the other one is got a GMRS sticker in that corner that I was pointing to.
Yeah, that one doesn't happen to have it. I don't know if this is a GMRS radio, so I don't know if. Yeah, this one doesn't. It's a GMRS specific radio, but it doesn't
Yeah, it doesn't say either.
from BTEC. Yeah, it doesn't say.
Oh, isn't BTEC really Baofeng? It's just a
Yeah, the U.S.
label?
distributor.
Yeah.
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 All right.
What do you think
So-
about that radio?
Harris. I'm not very familiar with Harris.
So where I work is the police academy. So
Mhm.
Harris Radio is what CSIP, their 911 for Madison County uses. So AMK, is that AMK? Yeah. They were buying some radios.
So you should
I'm
have
like,
a
hey, I need a
cheat
couple
sheet there that tells you
GMRS.
what the frequency.
So I got
Well, that's the funny thing. I don't
Midland's
see one in this
GMRS
manual,
list
but
for all
in
the
this one
radio
it does.
channels.
Yeah.
This manual
And
has
they were able to
frequency.
program that.
So
Sometimes the police EMT radios can be reprogrammed. Sometimes they
So
can't.
channel- like,
The main thing is sometimes they control the programming software. Sometimes you can get a hold of the radios, but you can't always get a hold of the software.
So they programmed it.
525
So
or
far, I'm
something
finding
like
that
that.
it works with every.
I mean, as long as you can get them programmed, then usually it's fine. It may not be. It's called type certified,
So
but again, FCC is not trying to hunt down people that don't have the right kind of radio. I mean,
because
it's
that one, these radios are sold as for factories.
yeah.
You know, just to talk around, and so therefore, to me, I would think that it goes through like those walls.
Yeah, GMRS and MERS. MERS is used a lot commercially, even though it's freely available to anybody. But it's because it's that near that 70 centimeter bandwidth, and it does penetrate buildings and things better. And in a building, you're not trying to go that far, right? So that's why they don't really need the distance; they need the penetration.
The only aggravating
Four
thing is that
6'2"
antenna, but you know, you make a good point.
575, so you can
Better
better
the antenna. You
Yeah.
know, I wanted to buy a smaller antenna, but I don't think I'm going to now, just because what you
What's
said
wrong,
there.
I went-
Well, and usually what you want is a bigger antenna,
Uh,
but it's just less convenient that way. So you got that big antenna
Gee,
flop there.
ours is a
Oh,
little
it's
soft,
jumping. It's jumping
which is
too far.
actually a detriment because it's not as much metal.
Yeah, it's just a little tougher to.
I think you can
we
go
had
in the
the-
menu.
I said we used to have a samurai,
Mhm.
which literally wasn't enough metal.
Yeah. My wife used to have a samurai.
Set the
You know,
step.
it's crazy. You was talking about
The
the
step is too
CBs.
Okay.
My grandpa was a truck driver.
Okay,
So
so
we
you got
always had
20K
CBs and trucks
Mhm.
just
step,
for the fun
so
of it.
you don't want it to go
Because
that
now
far.
nobody, no truck driver talks on a
Yeah,
CB.
they're doing cell phones, a little bit of GMRS, but
Okay.
Yeah, you can run,
Yeah.
you can
What
drive
are-
down the highway
Alright.
with a scanner running, you won't pick up a damn thing.
What are Are they just randomly picking out channels on GMRS just to talk to each other?
I don't know. I haven't tracked them.
19s are common CB.
I'm learning myself.
Oh, Randy Mason.
Yeah, I've from my home. I'm near I-75 where I live, close enough, and I was trying to test the CBs and stuff, and I wouldn't get anything. There was nothing to test. I was like, couldn't hear anybody, couldn't reach anybody.
The only time you get it is when there's like the traffic stop and you get a few smart alerts on
And out west, there's a few more apparently, but it's not nearly as big as it was in the 70s and 80s. Yeah, it's not.
I remember being young, walking drive around the road, Grandpa. Everybody's on the radio.
Yeah.
Get on there.
A lot of ham started on CB because it was free and everybody could get on it, and it got popular. And with the movies, Smoking the Bandit and others.
Have you got a minute to take a look at mine?
Let me break things down because I think they may have another class coming up. Which rig is yours?
Just the other side of the brush pile.
Oh, that orange one right there? Yeah, give me just a couple minutes to break down.
Very knowledgeable.
Any questions or anything?
Well, that's how I learned to do
No,
that.
I need to get me a couple of handhelds
Oh, I see the frequency.
just to have when other people ride with me. I've got
That's what
a
they're
50
using.
watt unit, but
Well, I don't
I
know.
learned something today from you while you were talking earlier.
Good.
Turn it down.
So they
Yeah.
have this,
Yeah, when you're on the trail, you just don't need that much.
Probably blowing them out of the water.
Jeep, I should say. It had the channels.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've already got
Well,
mine.
I got a mobile. I've got a little
Good,
mobile
good deal.
one.
Yeah.
And
But
it-
yeah, I'd
and
like
that
to
just
get into
does
the ham
channels,
side
you
of stuff, but
Yeah.
I
So
don't know if I want to invest that kind of money, time.
Yeah.
This
I mean, they've made the test about as easy as they can make it.
channel mode,
The questions are published, the answers are published. You just got to memorize the stuff and then
Oh,
go
I'm
take
not
the
worried
test.
about taking the test.
Yeah.
Be no problem.
Yeah.
I'm just talking about getting myself set up for ham because I wouldn't want to do mobile. I would do it at the house.
Yeah.
Just have a permanent setup.
I mean, it just depends on what you want to get into. You can get a radio for 650, 700, or you can spend 10 grand. It's just whatever you want to spend. They all do about the same jobs.
Yeah.
It just depends on how fancy you want to get about it. But
I've got a water tower in my back of my property
you might
too.
need to
They'd
get
be
you might need to put
perfect
that
if I
in
could
your shirt
get
program.
on it,
That's
get an
free to
antenna out
download.
Mm.
Okay.
And
to get a lot of
the
range.
data cable.
yeah, especially if it's grounded well, which it should be. But
Yeah, it's steel tank.
Okay.
Mhm.
So
It'd
you
be grounded
probably
great.
have to
if it's
probably
grounded
need
well,
to go
that's
to
always a
chirp
plus.
Okay.
But if you
So if you were
go on
going to
YouTube, you can learn how to use
tell
chirp.
someone to pick up a handheld just to have as a
So
chair
I haven't
or
used
to
chirp
hand down or
myself
something like
because
that,
I've got a
what would
Mac.
you recommend?
And it's
For
supposed to be able
GMRS,
to talk to my
for
radio,
trail rides,
but my radio
almost
doesn't
anything can
say
work
my
decently
radio.
well. These are BTECs, which are the American distributor for Baofeng, and these are GMRS specific radios. For an inexpensive radio that you can use on the trail, if you hand it to somebody and it walks away accidentally, you're not out a whole bunch of money. They work just fine. You don't have to, in GMRS, you don't have to spend a lot of money.
No.
You'd have to work hard to spend a lot of money on GMRS,
Yeah.
which is, there's mobiles that are $400 or $500, but handhelds, you're just not going to spend that much. So, I mean, just whatever.
Yeah, not a Rubicon.
Now, do you sell or you just
No, I don't sell. No.
just give it a class?
Yeah, I'm just giving a class. They knew that I was a ham radio guy and
He's
stuff
a
like
funny
that. So
character.
said, hey, do you mind giving a class? And I
I
said, yeah, that's okay.
Match his, but he's